if the neshama, the higher self, is neutral, the higher self knows that it can choose one of these two modalities: the modality to live according to one's vision, or the modality to destroy it. So many people say to me, "I know what I should do. I know that that's better. I just get weak." So where would the korban come? So here's the case that I encountered over the past several months. A person said to me, it went really bad, Rabbi. I was in my car with my spouse and child. I got really upset, and I said horrible things to every one of them. Everybody has a weak point. Everybody has a fear about themselves, something that they're not whole about. I know that about my family, and I hit each one of them in the place that it hurts the most. I don't think I deserve to be in my family. If they all abandoned me, they would. They got stone silent, petrified in the car. We got home. Everybody went their separate way. He said, I offered feeble apologies, but I know I've caused great hurt that I don't, if my family can ever recover from it. I'm giving you a bit of a summary. Now think about this. I said, okay, so you owe, biblical times now, as I said 2 weeks ago, I don't know if you're qualified to apologize yet, because I don't think we're qualified to apologize until we have a deep sense of empathy to the person we have wronged. So apologies are oftentimes the minimal that people do because it's the minimum of what they owe. But they really haven't gone to a deep, empathetic appropriation of what they've done. So not just their own self-knowledge, understanding the dark motivation that caused us to engage in hurtful behavior, but a deep empathetic understanding of what this has done to the other person. So think for a moment that I now, as a priest in ancient Israel, I say, okay, we're going to work this through. And this is a farmer with a small flock. And I say, I want you to go out to your goat herd, and I want you to pick out your favorite animal. And the person goes out there, and we look at the 10 or so goats. I said, do you have a favorite? And the one that nuzzles up to him, and the one that he treats well. And he says, yes, I have a favorite one. This is my favorite goat, Bessie. I said, okay, so we're going to have to kill Bessie. And it sounds utterly horrible. I said, eventually, would you kill Bessie for food and give it to the poor? He said, yeah, that's very likely what would happen. She's not going to live forever. I said, well, since there is the sacrificing of the slaughter of your animal to sell the meat to other people, you're going to give that, but I want to do something else instead. I want you to, for a moment, get your stool and look down at Bessie, this animal whom you love, and say, it's your flesh for my flesh. It's your blood for my blood. It's your life spirit for my life spirit. At some very deep level, I don't even deserve to be here. I've taken the gift of language that God gave me, and I've perverted it. I've taken the gift of a family that God gave me, and I'm destroying it. All the great good in life that God gives, I destroy it serially one by one, day after day. There's a part of me that doesn't even think I should live. Not that I'm going to kill myself, but I look at what I've done. I've created far more damage in my life than I've created good. And I imagine myself working with a person who would have a script. And then at a certain point, it comes the time to sacrifice the animal. And he has to do it himself. And the blood spills out, and you realize that life force spilling onto the ground stands for his life force that's been desecrated. And then he hands the animal over to his handlers, and they're going to cut up and distribute it to the poor. And then I say to him, I'm imagining myself the Kohen Gadol, I said, you did this. You're the one that did this to this animal. This is the consequences. You create a kind of a death. You cut your family apart when you talk that way. Now try to imagine what I've described to you is embedded in this person's memory, is engraved. That the damage he does now has a visceral, tactile, emotional connection where, using the biblical metaphor, he truly understands the ritual consequences of what he does. The sin that he does by hurting other people, the guilt that he feels by not living up to his vocation as a human being. And try to imagine a day or two of reflection, and then really feeling the pain of the family. In a sense, feeling them, that he's knifing them, that he's gutting them, that he's eviscerating them with his words. and not protect himself by saying, I was overwhelmed, but they do it to me, and I know I'm not perfect. None of that defensive stuff. Just own it. Sometimes I actually say that to people. For one time, just own it. And don't give me all these ameliorating sentences. And I can sometimes tell when a person says, I'm owning it. I'm owning it. I have no excuses. I have no defenses. I'm completely owning it. I feel horrible. And then, of course, my response then is that we all have the power of teshuvah. We have the power of rebirth. We have the power to take ourselves and create from this. And that's one reason I love this Torah portion. I'll go ahead and quote from the Haftarah. It says, from all your contamination, this is Isaiah chapter 36, verse 25. From all your contamination and from all your filth, I will cleanse you. I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I shall put within you. Now try to imagine that there's a divine that is ready to cleanse you and to put a new heart and a new spirit within you. That there's a way to do it. Now, for us, it's not going to be an animal sacrifice. And of course, by the times of the Bible, the prophets saw through it because people didn't have this deep inner confession that they would write. They would do it as purely rote religion, only the surface of it. And the great prophets, especially Isaiah, Jeremiah, and many others, looked at the sacrificial system and said it's not working because people think it's the sacrifice that does it and not the self-examination, confession, and the torment that you create for yourself. Okay, so we don't have animal sacrifices anymore. I want to say to you, we don't have animal sacrifices, but we're not any better. Nobody's better because we don't have animal sacrifices. I don't want animal sacrifices, but I don't pretend that the average person who does hurtful things to other people is any more ready to confront what they do than the time of animal sacrifices. The sacrifices don't make any difference. The question is, are you willing to go through the pain of confronting yourself and offering a korban chatat, a sin offering, a guilt offering within, and are you willing to, as it were, obliterate, to efface? The Hasidic tradition calls this the annihilation of the anochi, the annihilation of the stiffness of the ego self, and replace it with a new heart and a new spirit. So I wanted to share this with you because many times when we think of animal sacrifice, we get distracted. We say, that's not me, that's terrible, that's so biblical, that's so ancient, that's so Old Testament. And what I want to say is you're looking at the wrong thing. If you look at the penitent, if you look at the person who owes the guilt offering, who owes the sin offering, it's you. You are in that play. That's you in it. And if you have a better way to truly experience your need to make a guilt offering or a sin offering, please tell me. Because I think I have the way that I teach. But if you don't have a teaching, if you don't have a path. So as we move to Pesach, which, as you know, in the Hasidic tradition, Pesach and the high holidays, they're very similar days because Pesach is liberation from the Yetzer Hara. Of course, the high holidays is the purification through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but they're very similar to each other. When people say to me, sometimes they say, isn't the work before Pesach or similar to the work before Yom Kippur? I say yes. They say, why is that? I say, because it's the main work that we human beings have to do. The main work that we human beings have to do is to be liberated from the Yetzer Hara, to live lives with a new heart and a new spirit, as I was saying last night, to live within the spiritual and the moral order and not fight it and not make your life bitter by it, but somehow have the grace of a dancer, that you have the choreography within you, that the music is beautiful and life is not a slugging match with your Yetzer Hara, that you actually have achieved some mastery over it. So I'd love you to, whenever you think about the sacrifices and you feel this sense of off-putting, perhaps remember for today, it'll go up on the website, and use this as a meditation to truly, truly go within for some inner examination, inner work. The next Shabbos that we have before the high holidays is Shabbat HaChodesh, the Sabbath of the new month. And at that time, I'll do a recapitulation of the teachings of Shabbat Shekalim, Shabbat Zachor, today, which is Shabbat Parah, then Shabbat HaChodesh, and show you that yet again, the Hasidic treatment of the Arba Parshiot before Pesach is one of the greatest paths to human enlightenment and liberation that I've ever studied, ever read, ever taught, and ever practiced. All right, that's the end of my teaching for today, my 10 minutes of what I'm calling Judaism 101, parts of our tradition that I want to bring to mind, that I want to give a new interpretation to. Now I want to talk about my focus for today, inspired by Parshat Tzav. Parshat Tzav, which contains the word command, where Adonai is saying to Moses, command others. First of all, this term command makes us realize, of course, it seems to be obvious, but not obvious enough, that we have free will. You don't command people who don't have free will because they're automatons, they're robots. You don't have to program them and then remind them to do it. That's just what they do. We human beings are such that, as I said last night and this morning, we have some sense of the moral order, we have some sense of the spiritual order, but two things happen. One is we don't study it enough. It's one thing I ended last week and I want to emphasize today. Always have something that you're studying. Whether it's poetry, whether it's popular psychology, whether it's something deep, but always have something that you're studying that puts you in touch with the moral and spiritual order. As I go back through my library, there's a book that I've had since the 1970s that I still come back to. It is not worn out, and that's M. Scott Peck's book, A Road Less Traveled. If you don't have a book that immediately comes to mind, M. Scott Peck, A Road Less Traveled. And again, as we move toward the Wisdom Institute, I want to put a bibliography up and create teaching tapes, teaching recordings around these books that I think every person should have available to have a Torah in front of you. I'm not talking about Torah literature, but the idea of the teaching that will help you understand and remind yourself and reinvigorate you to study and live by what I'll call the great moral and spiritual order. So the Torah portion, Tzav, has the idea that we have to remind ourselves over and over again. It's not so that we know it. It's not that we get it. It's actually a command, an inner decision. You're commanding yourself. Oftentimes when people say to me, yeah, Rabbi, yeah, I know this stuff. You taught it. I put it on my refrigerator. Part of me says, you haven't actually decided. You decided to put it on your refrigerator. That's good. You decided to take the class. You decided to have some notes. But you didn't decide that you're going to do it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be trying to remember what the 4 C's and the bad Jedi is. If you really decided, you'd be telling me. So when we decide not both the ends, but the means for human transformation. Now, the Hasidic rabbis understood the idea of the altar as being something of a symbol for human consciousness. It's a stretch, but fire is a natural symbol. So they see the fire at the end of the wick as something like human consciousness, human brightness, human radiance, and then seeing the shemen, the oil, as that which fuels the fire. And as we know from our Hanukkah teachings, the oil can go out. You can have the greatest of intentions. You can want to do good things. But if the oil is expended, the fire goes out, the oil is gone. And what normally happens after that is a sense of what Emile Durkheim, the great French social psychologist, would call anomie. I don't belong anywhere. Nothing means anything to me. Oftentimes a sense of despair, a sense of depression. Now, many people feel depression because there actually is some kind of chemical imbalance. I'm putting that aside. Many people feel depression because they're very angry at themselves for not taking advantage of opportunities. They're angry at other people for letting them down. They're angry at life, angry at God. And as William Glasser teaches, when you understand that some great degree of depression means the human being is depressing anger and working through anger that you're not aware of, that can be a great way through. That's a core part of wisdom work that I teach often. Today I want to talk about a different kind of depression, which is the depression of when the oil runs out. You're not really mad at anybody. You just don't have anything to give. You just feel empty inside. So the question is, why do we get there, and what do we do about it? Why do we get there, and what do we do about it? So I want to borrow from the terms of Roberto Assagioli and talk about that depression as emptiness, because in the Hasidic world, as I mentioned last night, they take this on forcefully. They talk in extremes, they talk in hyperbole, but they say this depression, they call it dark-spiritedness, is the worst sin. Remember when I first heard this in high school, what the worst sin, worse than murder? And they say, yeah, it's not literal. But why do people suddenly live dissolute lives? Why do people start having addictions? Because lives are so empty, they'll do anything to feel better, including engage in addictions. When people are that empty, there is no right and wrong. They don't feel constrained by any kind of moral code. So this idea that from the Hasidic perspective, to allow this spiritual darkness to overtake you is, quote unquote, the worst sin, which, and again, this is, I think, Hasidic hyperbole, but it's the sin that allows the other sins, but also in some ways a very great sin, which is taking the gift of life and allowing life to be dark and empty and meaningless. That's not why we're here, to live dark, empty, and meaningless lives. There are things we can do about it. So I want to talk about first about Assagioli's act of will, one area in specific, and that's where he talks about in the introduction and toward the end of the book. Hold on a second. I want to make sure I have the terminology right. He has the qualities of the will, the facets of the will, and I confuse them. So I'll stick with qualities of the will, although it might not be the exact term because I have the book in front of me. Many people confuse the will. The Hebrew term would be koach ratzon. The Hebrew word ratzon can be will or desire, but when you add the word koach in front of it, which means power, it more unambiguously means the term will. Many people think that the strong will is the only will. Over and over again, when people want to do something, they just say, I'm just going to do it. And they put it in their schedule, and they talk about it, and they make a commitment, and that can last for so long, and then there's a collapse, a crash. Now, the collapse of the crash can sometimes take days, months, or even years, but then there's a crash. And the crash is because when people will something, they don't realize that the Yetzer Hara is making an opposite decision. There's an oppositional will. The minute you will to do something good, your Yetzer Hara is willing to undo it. It happens simultaneously. When you decide to lose weight, Yetzer Hara says, actually, we're going to gain weight. When you decide to start reading, Yetzer Hara says, yeah, you're not going to do any reading. We'll interfere with that real quick. Every time you open a book, we're going to get you super distracted, and you're going to be, number one, not reading and mad at yourself. We're going to really ambush you there. So in the Hasidic teachings, whenever you decide to do anything good, your Yetzer Hara wakes up and feels that it's under attack, because your Yetzer Hara doesn't want this to happen. So the Yetzer Hara, number one, will undo that, and oftentimes double down in its version of life for you, which is an unfulfilled life without virtue, without goodness, without love. So just remember, in your will to live according to a higher version, there's an opposite will to do the other thing. Now, one of the great powers of the Yetzer Hara is it hides in the dark. One of its greatest power is you don't know how powerful it is. It's very common in the AA world that says when a person decides to sober up, that the Yetzer Hara is doing push-ups in the dark. I really like that idea because the Yetzer Hara does not like to be pushed around by your desire to clean up. Okay? So it's already getting ready. So that requires what Assagioli calls the skillful will. When you will yourself to do anything, there are two kinds of skill you need. Number one, the skillful will to get the thing done, and the skillful will to fight resistance. Okay? So this I'm adding to Assagioli a little bit now, because Assagioli, in my mind, as I've read through the book several times, does not include the idea of resistance in the book. He has great ideas on the skillful will, but not an overt teaching of dealing with resistance. So and you can all imagine things in life that you've decided to do. Right? The many things that people decide to do to get better at something, things, by the way, that you're not gifted at. So I can think of many things that I do that I'm relatively gifted at, and all I have to do is hone the skill a little bit. And other things that I'm not gifted at that I find that I really have to figure out a way to get this thing done and also fight the resistance. So as I think about a few people in my life, I've known people that said to me, I've gone through my life, I'm 60, I have enough money, I want to become wise, I want to be a Torah scholar. I say, that's a wonderful thing, we got to put you on a schedule. What would you like to study? Well, I don't know, I want to study the whole thing. I said, I don't know how to answer that. I said, but I can tell you from a Hasidic perspective, the place you start is the poetry of the Siddur. Now, many people don't think that because they think there's some ancient text in some kind of brown covering, with the Hebrew on the side. That's way up in some archive, and you take it down and you dust it off and you lay it open, and all the secrets are in that text. And they're waiting for me to bring that out. That's not where the secrets are. It's not in some dusty volume high up in the archives. The sacred text is the one that every Jew should have in their hand, should have handy, which is the prayer book. This is the great innovation of Hasidic Judaism that says the most common text is the most transformational text. I said, so what I need to do is I would like to show you how to read the Siddur. I've given many classes on it. Many of you have taken classes on it. You know how transformative this can be. But the first thing is they don't believe me. So they come to me and they say, what about the Talmud? I said, I don't think you're ready for the Talmud, to tell you the truth. You can take a Talmud class, but I don't think that's the way to enlightenment. Well, what about the Zohar? I said, yeah, we're not talking about scanning the Zohar, right? We're talking about studying the Zohar. So we're gonna brush up on our Aramaic here, or we're gonna really learn how to study very, very difficult poetry. I said, have you studied John Milton lately, or Shakespeare, or Chaucer? How you doing with that? Not so good. I said, well, Zohar is harder than all of that. It's very deeply packed metaphors. I said, it's there, but it's not the first thing on the ramp. Well, what's the first thing on the ramp? The prayer book. Okay. Now, I'm watching in front of me the resistance begin. I want to get to the good stuff. I want to get to the secrets. What kind of secret? I remember a scene in The Sopranos where Tony Soprano goes all the way back to the home country, and he finds an oracle, some woman in the town who's a quasi-Italian Sicilian version of a shaman, and she takes him to the oracle in the hills of Sicily, and they go to the oracle, and he says, okay, what does the oracle say? And the oracle says something like, you are your own worst enemy. And Tony says, I came all the way to Italy to find that out. He wanted to shoot her and then shoot himself, right? Whatever the old man in the mountain's going to say, whatever the shaman's going to, whatever's going to say, you already know it. I want you to think about it. Is any wizard going to tell you anything that you don't already know, but just say it in a more catchy way? Sometimes when I read the things that people put on Instagram and Facebook and they say something, it's really well said. I say, oh my God, that is so nicely phrased. And I think about it and I thought to myself, and now what am I going to do? Now what? Now that I know everybody's soul, somebody asked me about a poetry and power poetry. And I just threw out, I said, we are all dead walking in graveyards, and yet the gravestones fall upon our heads. And person said, where'd you read that? I said, I just made it up. That's great, Rabbi Finley. I said, no, it's not. I'm making fun of poetry. Therefore what? Therefore what? Now what do I do? Be impressed. I know how to produce a poem about death and graveyards and existential nihilism at will, that's not actually a great thing. The great thing is how to live life where I'm not walking dead in a graveyard with gravestones falling on my head. So yeah, you can find cool stuff. You can read and, oh my God, you can be so impressed, and now what? So the question is not, in my mind, I don't think I'm being cynical. I'm trying to be very real with you. It's not reading things where you say, oh wow. You want to study things where you have to put so much time and energy into it that you have to find the treasure within, and it's not just handed to you. And this is one of my problems, and I'm being very frank with you about reading inspirational literature. It doesn't require of me much work. And I like it when I'm delivered over these really nice high-sounding phrases and I think about it. I don't know what to do next other than I've been moved. I don't mind being moved. I like to be moved in poetry and inspirational literature. But I'm not trained on knowing what to do next. Okay? And again, I always try to give the analogy of my jiu-jitsu studio. We sit there and we all say nice-sounding phrases. You only get into it when you get out what you put into it. Ah, that's so true. Now get on the mat and fight. You can have a nice-sounding phrase, but at some point you got to get on the mat, and the mat that we're talking about is struggling with your own soul. So when I say the prayer book, I know it takes work. I know it means not necessarily learning Hebrew, but learning that the prayer book is poetry. How does poetry work? Taking a line of poetry, even if you don't read Hebrew, at least learn how to do it phonetically in Hebrew. I have all kinds of handouts. We've studied some of them before. Meditate to yourself, where to the point you have it memorized. Meditate the translation. Again, you don't have to know Hebrew, just memorize that much. Understand how the words work. And there's a certain point in Hasidic practice where the sounds of the words and the meaning of the words, when you hold them in the mind's eye, they start to have a gravitational force on what I would call the granite between consciousness and the soul. And that just takes some time. Sometimes you have to chant the same verse over and over again, and the verse changes as you're chanting it, and it sinks further and further down, and then it hits the realm of the living waters. Well, that's not like reading an inspirational phrase. And again, I'm not against inspirational phrases, but inspirational phrases, for me, don't take enough work, such as the work of memorizing poetry, holding poetry in the mind's eye, and allowing poetry to sink down into the depth of yourself. So when I think about the growth, human growth, the strong will wears out. The skillful will, and this is where we have to develop a vast variety of skills, but when I offer the person the skill of memorizing Siddur, memorizing the transliteration, the skill of some degree of meditation, the skill of letting it sink down into their soul, people don't want to do it because it's too hard. Anybody who has done it, their life changes forever. So the strong will wants to push, and then give out. The skillful will masters skills. Remember, one skill is, I'll give a different one from the person who wanted to become a great Torah scholar, but didn't want to learn Siddur, although that's happened to me in my life more than once. And and what it means to master those skills in a gradual, incremental way, and not what I would call the mistaken skill to get the black belt on the second day, to become a Torah scholar on the second day. All right, now think about yourself. Think about when you've decided to master something and you went at it. Number one, in a non-skillful way, you poured all your energy to it and you ran out, as opposed to realizing the skill is a very delicate thing. You have to give a little bit at a time. You have to apply very incrementally and never wear or exhaust yourself out. Now, on a much more mundane level, I see the students with their homework assignments. I see adults with big work projects. I see people who deal with procrastination. Is they look at the big thing and they just feel overwhelmed. And of course, the answer that you all know from reading any books on this is break it down into small parts. The smallest that the resistance doesn't jump out at you. Look at the little small part and say, I can do this much and not feel overwhelmed. And that's all you do. The person says, but I have all this other stuff to do. and I remind people, you're actually not cleaning out your garage. What you're actually doing is training your will. When you think I have to clean out my garage, you're mistaken. You've already lost that battle. But if you pick up one box and pick up 3 pieces of paper in one box, and you say, I'll do 3 pieces of paper today, your Yetzer Hara is already getting the feeling that you are achieving mastery. Because you say, I don't need to clean the garage, I need to cultivate my will. And I'll do it 3 pieces of paper a day. So the strong will says, I got to clean out my garage. You devote a whole Sunday to it. You might get it done. If you get it done, that's great for you. But on the other hand, you might get a little bit done and then avoid it forever. The skillful will says, it's not the garage that's the issue. It's my will that is the issue. The garage is there today. And who knows if that garage is still going to be there a year later. But your will, your unskilled will, is with you until you decide to create a skillful will. So the strong will is push, push, exhaust. The skillful will is anything difficult, I'm going to break down into the tiniest increments. I'm going to take all the wisdom I can. I will get that one tiny little increment done, and then go on to the next increment. One thing I've seen, again, I'm now reaching to the utterly mundane, is bar mitzvah speeches. With my first pulpit as a rabbi, Irvine Jewish Community, 1981, I entered the world of procrastination and bar mitzvah speeches. My rabbi asked me to write a speech. I wrote a speech. I didn't know it was a thing. So I asked the kid to write the bar mitzvah speech. We outlined everything. I come 2 weeks later down to Irvine. Is it done? No. I said, I don't understand. You had an assignment, you didn't do it. And then the parents said, well, we told them to do it. And I realized that I had turned their home into hell by asking for this bar mitzvah speech. And they fought. I didn't want to do it. I said, what's the right? He said, well, I don't know what to write about. I said, yeah, I gave you something to write about. And I realized, oh, here it is. We're going to break it down. We're going to do the 5-part bar mitzvah speech. We're going to find one tiny little thing. And when it said, God said to Moses saying, I said, tell me who Moses was. Start there. Just 3 sentences on Moses. 3 sentences on the word said. Just start doing it. And the kids say, but I have a whole bar mitzvah speech. I said, no, you don't. You just got to say, when God said to Moses, I want to make sure you know who Moses was. And therefore you take this big assignment, the bar mitzvah speech, and drill it down. And one thing I said to the parents was, I learned at a very young age, I said to the parents, you got to stay out of it. Because you're turning his war with himself into a interpersonal war with his parents. I said, the payoff in not writing the speech is driving you guys nuts. Let's take the payoff out. You're out of it. You just trust that on the day of his bar mitzvah, he's going to have a speech, right? I know what I'm doing. I already knew what I was doing. I mean, I was a 26-year-old new rabbinical student, but I had been through the Marine Corps, so I had to deal with issues of will and discipline and so forth. I knew a little bit about it. And I knew when it's a big thing, you make it into a small thing. You make it something interesting, bite-sized, and the will starts to turn, and the Yetzer Hara, as it were, flees before the power of a skillful will. So Assagioli says, the strong will get you through some things. The skillful will, a lifelong of skillful will, in a wise, skillful way, breaking anything in life down to things that you can actually accomplish. That's number 1. And number 2, this is where Finley adds to it, the wise understanding that any time you want to get anything worthwhile done, resistance is there to fight you. So you are both mastering skills and fighting resistance. The last thing I want to say about Assagioli today is that he says behind the strong will, behind the skillful will, is what he calls the good will. And the idea that I'm here actually to act as an agent of the good. I'm trying to bring good into the world, good into life. So I want to go all the way back to my metaphor on the korbanot that I offered at the very beginning today of the man in his car who lacerated his whole family because he got overwhelmed. Listen, if he wanted to achieve the skill on hurting people with as few words as possible, he had mastered that skill. He was a black belt in wrecking his family with the way that he talked. It's not a skill that he wanted, it was a skill that he was born with. And that skill had to go forby. Now, What did he have to do? Right? And this is something I recommend for everybody. Wherever you go, anywhere you go, create an intention of what's at stake. You go to sit down at dinner with your, whatever it is, spouse, family, friends. You say to yourself, my goal here is to help create goodness. You get in the car. The goal is not to get everybody in line. The goal is not only to get where I'm going. We're going to be spending time together here. The goal here is to create as much goodness as possible with everybody that's here. That's a great skill. That's a great kind of consciousness. So in adding to this idea that there is a fire and the oil, the last one is we have to have the strong skill, the skillful skill, and the strong will, the skillful will, and the good will to create that oil that keeps the light lit. All right, that's